The following lesson is linked to Learning Outcome 3, Writing and Presenting. It addresses the assessment standard that requires learners to demonstrate planning skills for writing a specific purpose, audience, and context. Learners should be able to identify the target audience and the specific purpose, such as narrating, entertaining, persuading, arguing, explaining, informing, describing, or manipulating. Learners should also be able to identify and explain types of text to be produced, such as imaginative, informational, creative, transactional, and multimedia texts.
Hello everybody, my name is Reno. Today we start an exciting new series of lessons called Writing Appropriately. And Writing Appropriately deals with informal and formal writing techniques and methods. In this first lesson, we are going to examine what are the similarities and differences between creative writing or writing creatively and transactional or formal writing. At school, you are taught both creative and transactional writing. It is extremely important that you understand and practice both these types of writing. Then you will know which type is appropriate for which situation. Unless you are going to become a writer or journalist, you might think that there's not much use in learning creative writing at school. But there are many people who like to write creatively in friendly letters and emails. Even today, with ongoing advances in technology, we still write certain things traditionally, like a note of thanks or a letter of condolence when someone has passed away. Before we begin, let us recap what we have already learned about informational or transactional writing. At school, we realize that there are many situations where we have to provide formal information, and hence we have to write a formal piece or an informational piece. Let us recap all the possible places where we will use transactional or informational writing. Formal information includes writing a report. For example, on the achievements of your fundraising committee for the school magazine. A request for information. For example, faxing a tertiary institution for information about a course you would like to study. Or an application. For example, applying to a large company for a bursary or loan. Transactional writing skills are extremely useful to have and will ensure that you leave a lasting impression on your colleagues and employers when you enter the working world. It is also important for you because being able to write both formally and informally is a necessary life skill. If you learn the techniques and formulas in this section and are able to use them effectively, you will be at a greater advantage when you begin your professional careers. For school, it is also extremely important to develop your creative and transactional writing skills because you will have to demonstrate them in writing for your portfolio. Now that you've had a taste of what we're about to learn, let's take a look at the outcomes for today's lesson. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to describe the differences between creative writing and transactional writing. Let's begin this lesson by focusing on creative writing. In grade 10, you learned how to write for different purposes and saw that creative or imaginative types of writing include narrative, descriptive, and argumentative writing. Remember, the definition of creative writing is writing that is done to tell a story, describe something, or be imaginative. Now, at school, creative writing is all about writing poetry and fiction, which may include stories about imaginary events. It does, however, not have to be completely factless. In fact, in an argumentative or discursive essay, for example, the right combination of creativity and information allows for a unique and persuasive argument. Now, let's look at some examples to see whether the writing is transactional or creative. The following essay is entitled "Education is an Essential Requirement for the Enjoyment of Life" and was written by a grade 11 learner called Anne. Education is an essential requirement for the enjoyment of life. I asked my little sister whether she enjoys her life. She replied with an enthusiastic 8-year-old yes, and I asked her when she did not enjoy her life. She thought for a while and she said, "When I do things wrong and when I am unhappy." In trying to decide whether the passage is transactional or creative, let's look at the title again. Education is an essential requirement for the enjoyment of life. What kind of composition do you think the teacher is expecting? Well, judging by this title, probably a piece of argumentative or persuasive writing. Anne, however, opens her essay creatively before getting into the factual argument. This is ultimately a piece of creative writing because she is expressing her original ideas. Note how she has combined real-life details with original creative ideas. Now, to further illustrate the differences between transactional and creative writing, have a look at the following two varying definitions of the word education. The first is from the Oxford English Dictionary. Education, the systematic instruction, schooling, or training in preparation for life or for some particular task. Can you see that this is definitely informational writing? It's obvious that it comes from a dictionary and is meant to describe exactly what the word education means. It is giving you information about the word. Now let's take a look at the next definition of education. This is from Ambrose Bierce, the Enlarged Devil's Dictionary. Education, that which discloses to the wise and disguises from the foolish their lack of understanding. Now, what would you call this definition? Is it informational or creative writing? Well, let's take another look to see what type of writing it is. Education, N. The N stands for noun. The word education is a noun. So far, this looks exactly the same as the first definition, but take a look at what happens next. Look at the words carefully. Education is that which discloses. To disclose is to show, make clear, or reveal. So it discloses to the wise, the people with knowledge or wisdom, what? What does education show? It shows their lack of understanding. The writer is trying to say that education shows people who think they are wise how much they do not know. Only through education do they realize how ignorant they actually are. What else does education do, according to this writer? Education is that which disguises or hides from the foolish, from silly or stupid people. What? What does education hide? Their lack of understanding too. This definition is an example of creative writing because the writer is expressing an opinion saying that some people are really silly or foolish in thinking that the knowledge they have is a real education. As we saw, it is obvious the first definition actually comes from a traditional dictionary. But the second one comes from a collection of amusing sayings that are written as if they are serious definitions, but they are definitely not. So, the first one is a perfect example of informational writing, while the second one is an example of creative writing. It is important, therefore, that you read everything carefully and be sensitive to language to see whether or not writing is creative or informational. Now, let's move from creative writing onto informational or transactional writing. Transactional writing involves the exchange of information for a specific purpose. Now let's do another example together to determine whether a piece of writing is transactional or creative. Let's look at the passage. Soweto, complex of residential areas established during the apartheid era for black urban dwellers, named from the first syllables of the words Southwestern Townships. Perhaps the key to analyzing is to decide what the overall intention is. This passage clearly comes from a book of reference. It gives factual information such as when it was established and how it got its name, and it's written in unemotional language. For example, referring to a place as a complex of residential areas is far more neutral than describing Soweto as a township. This passage is definitely transactional. Now it's time to see if you can spot the difference between creative and informational writing in today's task. Carefully examine the following short passage and decide whether it is an example of creative or informational writing. And then explain your answer briefly. To the southwest of Johannesburg is Soweto, which is fascinating but highly dangerous for the unaccompanied, easily lost tourist. By now, I'm sure you are able to recognize the difference between creative or imaginative writing and informational or transactional writing. In answering questions, you should also be able to give reasons to substantiate your answers. In our next lesson, we will look at other ways to make our writing more effective and appropriate. Until then, goodbye.
Like this.